All right. So outside of the weather, we can discuss this week's demos. Actually, I think Scott's going to run, and I know we probably have a lot to talk about with the demos because there's some big projects going on.
Yeah, clearly a lot happened. Who would like to go first?
Julia, do you want to go first? Because ours is probably the shorter
Okay.
one.
All righty, who would like to share?
Yeah. I need access for screen sharing.
Oh, sorry, one moment.
I feel like that's a very
There you go.
weird Zoom feature they added recently. I don't know.
We did the filter search with Kelsey. First, we created the use state hook and we created search and set search. And we started with the empty string. Here we have the input state. For the value we have search on change. We are targeting the value of the input. And we can see here. But it will filter the items. To filter the items, we have filter method. Filter is taking whatever, it can be like capital letter, we are turning it to lowercase, then if it's including the search keywords like search letter, we are matching that. And we are again mapping the items to the single item. Yeah, do you want to add something, Kelsey?
I think the last thing is that when we also created a clear button, like the X button, that only appears when you've started typing in the input field. And if you click on that, then it just clears your search and the button goes away.
Yeah. Practice.
Awesome, that's a great demo. Great side-by-side demonstration of exactly what's happening. Thanks so much for showing us that. Was there anything else in your issue, or was that the sum of it? Awesome, nicely done. Thank you both so much. Kelsey, did you have anything to add for your part? Anything else?
Oh, the one other thing that we did, based on something we started and then a comment from Lewis, is that we had in oh, what file was it in? Here, let me see if I have it open. Oh, okay, here, I can show you. In the add item.js, previously, there was another state field for last purchase date, which wasn't ever being used. So we removed that and then just set the default last purchase date to null in our item template. That was kind of outside of our issue, but was something that we noticed. So we just went ahead and changed.
Awesome, great initiative. Yeah, thank you both very much for sharing that. Really appreciate it. So Isa and Sandy, I'd love to hear about what you did. Sounds like there's a lot going on there, and I was following the conversation. Sorry I wasn't in the office hours, but love to see what y'all came up with.
Yeah, I don't know where we start. I guess maybe we'll start just kind of explaining what we were trying to do, and then we'll kind of go into the code from there. I can share my screen. And okay, so yeah. So when a purchase is recorded, then we want to be able to save the estimated number of days until the next purchase date. And we were going to use the calculate estimate function in order to do that. Yeah, so it's basically what we were trying to do. I don't know where we want to start explaining the code. This is in our branch, Sandy.
Okay, we could start off with the add item. I think where we added the two variables, number of purchases and next purchase, days until purchase. So we set number of purchase initially set to 0 and then days until purchase set to null. So those were the two variables we added because we needed those inputs for the calculate estimate function that we imported from the library estimates.js. And then I did a bunch of math there to calculate the next purchase date. And we set that inside a single item to be next purchase date on line 49.
Cool. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we kind of did some refactoring a little bit throughout the week. We got help during office hours, and then from code reviews from mentors, just like suggestions, I think. So at first we had next purchase date set as a variable, and then let's see, right here, days until purchase, days until the next purchase, basically we had set as that variable next purchase date. And then what we noticed was, since this was all in a handle change, then that days until purchase would be updated if the box was checked or unchecked. And we only want it to be updated when it was checked. So Sandy came up with the idea, we have like a condition to see if it's checked and kind of have that in there so that it'll only calculate it when it's being checked. So we, yeah, basically took the variable outside of, we initialize the variable like this, let next purchase date, and then if e.target is checked, e.target being the checkbox, then, calculate it. And then days until purchase is set to that variable that calculated basically days until purchase, or days until purchase, which is basically like what it was before that, so that when you uncheck it, it doesn't give you an error. Yeah, I don't know. It's I don't remember like everything that we did just because it was like a lot. We got like a lot of input. I think Lewis gave us this suggestion right here to add or1 to be the number of purchases, because there were some items in the database that didn't have number of purchases as a property yet, because we haven't made one. And so for those ones, we use or1, so we wouldn't get an error for that.
Also, Kelsey mentioned in the interval and how we were thinking, we weren't sure like where to incorporate frequency, right, Isa? So then we initially had latest interval set to 0. So Kelsey suggested that we use frequency as the initial value for latest interval, and that helps because that made it so that when days until purchase is first calculated using the calculate estimate, the initial value is set to the frequency. So that made sense, better than having the value of 0. So we use that change on line 40.
Yeah, and wrapped it in number so that it's not saved as a string, and also same thing on line 68 in the add item component. Wrapped it in number here so that when we're setting the frequency, just making sure that it's a number again. As demonstration, so just gonna add, oh, let me put that somewhere else. Add a new item, clipboard. Okay, so we have clipboard here. Okay, this one. So we have number of purchases, 0. Days until purchase. It's null right now, but when I click the checkbox, it changes to 14, which is the frequency. And number of purchases is 1. If I uncheck it, does that, and then check it again, which we might change later, but now days until purchase is 9. Number of purchases is 2. So yeah.
Awesome. I wanted to just say both of those demos were really good. I appreciated that both of the teams gave us like excellent context on exactly what they were doing, and then connected that up with a really thorough understanding of the code that I was able to understand, again, not as a JS person, but also then gave great demos showing kind of practically how that was working. So very impressed with all y'all. Nicely done. And I think that'll move us on to our next piece. Do we have a presentation this week?
Yeah, that's me.
Oh.
Okay, cool. So today we're going to talk about accessibility, which is one of my favorite things. So before we dive into that, I wanted to check in with everybody and see like what sort of things you already know about accessibility, or if this is the first time that you're hearing about it, just so I can sort of like adjust as we go.
I don't really know anything.
Yeah. Heard about it,
Amazing.
but I don't.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Cool. So then this is going to be great. All right, let me share my screen. Okay, so the way, I'll send the slides. Well, here, I'll put them in the chat for now, and then I'll put them in Slack in a minute. Okay, cool. So today we're going to talk about like an intro to accessibility, what it is, why we care about it, and then how you can test the accessibility of your sites and other sites to make sure that everybody can use your stuff. So before we get into that, this is just like, what's it called? It's like a numeronym, like an acronym, but with numbers. So if you see this like hashtag A11Y, these are like ones, they're not L's, which is what I first thought. And this is because there are 11 letters in between the A and the Y of accessibility. So yeah, if you see that, that's just like a shorthand for accessibility. Ironically, this is like not a very accessible numeronym. Like it's not a great name, but whatever. At least you'll know what it means. So accessibility, I guess I'm just gonna like read this out, but web accessibility is the inclusive practice of ensuring there are no barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites on the web by people with physical disabilities, situational disabilities, and socioeconomic restrictions on bandwidth and speed. So the basic idea is that we're designing things for the web. Everybody should be able to use them regardless of like physical disabilities. So if they're like blind or deaf or have like a motor impairment. And then there's also situational disabilities, which we'll talk more about in a little bit, which is like if you have a broken arm or you like are in the sun and so you can't really see your screen. So things that are like more related to your particular circumstances in a moment versus like a more long-term situation. And then socioeconomic. So like if you have slow internet, then that shouldn't restrict you from being able to use a website. So there's a couple of different like sort of general resources that you can use for accessibility. So the W3C they have like a web accessibility initiative group that's in charge of making standards for assessing whether or not a website has acceptable accessibility. And so there is this thing called the WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is like a really long list of different like things that you should have. So there's different like levels for success. There's like A, which is the bare minimum that you have to have. AA, which is the sort of generally, what is it? It's the sort of like industry standard for what you should aim for. And that's sort of like the middle level. And then there's AAA, which is like above and beyond. If you wanted to make it the most accessible experience, you could try and hit those. But generally AA is the one that you want to aim for. And then there's also, like in the US, there's Section 508, which is, I think it's the, what's it? There's like a name for it. It's like something about like Americans with Disabilities Act, I think. I don't remember the formal name for it, but basically there's legislation saying that like government agencies, so like local government websites, have to make their content accessible to people with disabilities. And then there are also, like now there are more, these same rules are being applied to like businesses. So I used to work at like a big retail company and they had to comply to these same sort of accessibility guidelines. So we've talked a little bit about this. So people with disabilities have different kinds of assistive technologies, is sort of the term for the group of tools that they use to browse the internet. So this can include things like screen readers, which will read out the content or the like interfaces. There's screen magnifiers, which just make your text bigger. Speech input, so if you can't type, you can like dictate what you want to be typed for you. Assistive keyboards, and then braille displays if you need like different ways to input information. Oops. And then for screen readers, there's sort of three main ones. So I'm on a Mac, so I have VoiceOver, and VoiceOver comes built in with all of your Macs. And then there's also, if you're on a Windows machine, there's NVDA, which is the free one. And then there's JAWS, which is pretty expensive. But I think JAWS is maybe the most popular one for Windows people, but it's very expensive and hard to get access to. So I've never actually used it because I've never worked at a place that like had the like licenses just up for grabs for any developer to test with. So why do we care about accessibility? We've talked a little bit about these things already. First of all, and this is like what I always come back to, is like building accessible websites is just the right thing to do. If you're going to make something that you're going to put online, you don't want to be excluding a large group of people from using that experience. So the same way that you wouldn't want to like only build something for men and not let anybody else use it, you don't want to build something just for people without disabilities and exclude everybody who does have one. Also, we've talked about like legally, you can if you're like a big business or the government, like you can be sued for not having an accessible website. This happened relatively recently with like Target and Domino's, where they were sued because people with disabilities couldn't use their website. There's also, this was something when I was first learning about accessibility that I guess I didn't know what the numbers were, but there are a non-trivial number of people with disabilities who use the web. So this link here estimates that 20% of people who visit a website have some sort of disability. And also more people in the US access websites via assistive technology, so like screen readers or screen magnifiers, than live in all of Canada, which is a lot of people. You wouldn't want to exclude like all of Canada from your site. So I don't know, I feel like I keep saying the same thing, but we should build our websites for everyone. And then this last piece is also something that is, to me, a very compelling argument that like when you build a website for people with when you build an accessible website with people with disabilities in mind, it's actually a better experience for everyone, because not everybody who navigates with a keyboard has a disability. Some people just like using a keyboard to navigate a website. So really, you should just build accessible stuff because it's the right thing to do and it will make your stuff better. So this talks a little about that last piece about like how building for people with disabilities is better for everyone. This sort of shows out, this table shows you know, across different, I don't know, I guess across different facets of disabilities, you can have like a permanent version of that. So like for touch, you could have a permanent version of that disability might look like having only one arm. Or you could have a temporary version of that same disability, which is like if you have your arm in a cast, so you can't use it for now, but you'll be able to use it again later. Or there's this situational one that we talked about where like if you're a new parent and you're carrying something, if you're carrying a child, you only have one arm and you still want to be able to use whatever tool that you need to like buy your shopping stuff, like what we're building. So by building with these sort of like permanent disabilities in mind, you're actually also helping people in this temporary and situational column as well. So it's an even broader range of people who will now be able to use your stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about some like general ways of how you can do to make sure you're building accessible websites. So these are some like best practices here, where if you want to start somewhere, this is a good sort of checklist to make sure that you hit all of these points. The first one is a big one, that's using valid semantic HTML. So we've been using, you know, there's different like heading, like H1, H2, H3, but there's also other elements like button, which we've been using. Sometimes people will try and recreate existing HTML elements. So like a button, they'll try and make a button out of like a div because they want to style it some type of way. But the button element under the hood has a bunch of accessibility features built into it already that browsers know, like, okay, this is a button, so I'm going to expose this kind of role to a screen reader, or I'm going to make it so that you can click on it with a space bar or an enter button. And so by trying to sort of roll your own button, you lose a lot of those built-in features and actually end up with a less accessible product than if you had just used the right HTML elements to begin with. So that's one that makes a really big difference. Also, using alt attributes for your image tags for all of your images is another like quick fix. So if you've got a picture, you should have a little description of what that image looks like so that people who are using a screen reader or like can't see the image themselves can still understand like what that content is. And this gets at the idea of trying to build like the same experience that a sighted user would have and trying to think about like, how would I convey that same feel to a non-sighted user? So yeah, there are sometimes you should always have an alt attribute, but if it's something like a decorative image, so it's just like, sometimes there will be like fun little pictures that are just used as like a divider between sections. In that case, you can pass in an empty alt attribute, which will then skip over that element for a screen reader. But either way, you should always have either an empty alt tag if you're like, we don't want people to like hear this content, or you should have a description in your alt text. There's also, I'm not going to talk too much about ARIA attributes, but basically these are extra attributes that you can add on to existing HTML elements that will give extra like screen reader functionality. These are good to know as you sort of get into more advanced use cases, but ultimately there's this quote over here, like the best ARIA is no ARIA at all. A lot of websites will, well, sometimes people will try and like compensate by adding extra ARIA attributes onto their stuff, and it actually just makes it worse, where now you've got like a label on something or like a role on a particular element. So people using a screen reader think that it's supposed to behave one way, but it doesn't actually. So that's like a worse experience than not having it in the first place. So yeah, you can look more, the W3C Web Accessibility Initiative people have more guidelines on those different attributes. There's also like keyboard focus is a big one. So making sure that all of your content, you can get to it if you like tab through on your keyboard. You should be able to reach all of the interactive elements. And there should also be like an outline so that you can see where your focus is. And then like the order in which your focus moves around the page should make sense. So it shouldn't be like, first you start out over here and then you go down here and then you go back up and then you like move around. There's a lot of like positioning that you can do now with like CSS Grid, where you can just sort of like move stuff wherever you want. But as you're doing that, you still have to make sure that like the tab order as it jumps from place to place makes sense. And then the last two are about color specifically. So some people are colorblind and can only see certain subsets of colors. So you want to make sure that your designs don't only use color as a way of conveying information. So like later, I think in an upcoming story, we're going to add like a way to indicate the frequency for our items in our shopping list. And the demo, I think, shows like a red one and a green one and a yellow one. But we'll want to make sure to make this accessible, you don't want that color to be the only way that people know what that status is. So there should be like some sort of label or something like that as well. And then the last piece is a big one, using the right color contrast. So like right here, this text is black on white. So that's got like a really high contrast. But, you know, if you had like a blue background, like then the contrast between the links and the background wouldn't be enough. And I think that this links to, this links to a tool that you can use to check the color contrast, where if you like type in, I don't know, does this let me pick something? Yeah, so if I like picked this foreground color, you can see here that like this does not have enough color contrast to meet these WCAG success criteria. So that's something that you can do. A lot of browsers also have this built in, which we'll look at in a second. But yeah, those are the sort of like baseline things that you can look at. Are there any questions about any of those things before we jump into like how to test it?
I was just going to say, I would be curious like how to change tab ordering, if it's just like the order of the HTML or if it's something different.
Yeah, that's a great question. It is based off of like the DOM structure. So the way that your elements are rendered in the HTML will be the order that they receive focus from a screen reader. So if you were going to use something like CSS Grid to say like, even though the items in this list are in this order, I want to like make this one look like it shows up here. That would be a weird experience then, because your tab order will still go in the order of the HTML under the hood. Yeah, great question.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, cool. We'll keep going for now, but if you have any, just pop in. Okay, cool. So we know sort of like what kinds of accessibility fixes that we want to do, but how do we like test our site after we've covered those things? Like, how do we test to see if our site is accessible or not? So this goes in, it's like a spectrum. It's better to do the lowest amount of accessibility testing than no accessibility testing, but in an ideal world, we would get to do like all of these things. So this sort of goes from least amount of work to like most amount of work, but also goes from like least amount of things that you can catch to most amount of things that you can catch. So the first level here is using an automated tool like Axe. We'll look at this in a second. This is like a browser extension that you can use to run on your web pages, which is good. And it'll catch a lot of these like basic things that we talked about before, like color contrast and missing alt tags. But it can only find like 30% of problems, because some of those things like the tab order is something that a computer can't catch, but a person can catch. So the next sort of middle level is doing like a more guided audit. There's another, I think this is a Chrome extension called Accessibility Insights that gives you sort of like a checklist of things that you can look for. There's also, I have one of these open. Yeah, there's this website called the Accessibility Project, so A11Y Project. And they have a checklist that you can sort of run through to test different parts of your website manually, but it at least gives you the list of like criteria to look for. So there's some stuff in here about like the actual content of your site. And then there's other stuff about like keyboard focus and your images. So that's more of like, it's not an automated set of tests, but it's more structured than if you were just to sort of like go out and test it with no sort of checklist. And then the third level is the most involved. It's also the most expensive, but it also gives you the best level of feedback. And that would be something like doing an actual user testing with a company like Fable Tech Labs. And so that'll be a company that like has a bunch of disabled users that they pay to test people's websites. And they'll give you much more detailed feedback about like, oh, this is technically accessible, but like this piece I found confusing. So it's basically like doing user testing with disabled users, because those are going to be the people who have the most experience using these tools. Like I'm relatively comfortable using a screen reader on my own, but it's not my primary way of navigating the web. And so I'm going to have a very different experience than somebody who like that is how they consume content. So yeah, there's like, these are the sort of general stages of accessibility testing. You can do some of these. You should do at the bare minimum this ACTS testing. But yeah, these other ones are like good things to do if you have the funding for it. Okay, cool. Any questions about that before we jump into playing around with some stuff?
Quick question.
Yeah.
Are these like resources that you've come across in your work? Like, have you come across like a lot of encouragement to build accessible products, or is this just something you did in your research?
Yeah, this slide deck was made by somebody else and I'm just using it. But a lot of these resources are things that I have heard of before. This like, whoops, not this one. The WCAG. This is the sort of like generally accepted standard across web accessibility everywhere. So this is like the industry standard, I guess is the term that I'm looking for. So this is something that people will refer back to if you're talking about like, oh, we want our website to be compliant. This is like what they use to measure whether or not it's compliant. As far as sort of like company-wide support, I think that it depends company to company. Personally, I wish that everybody cared about this. And there's, a bigger conversation to be had about ableism in general. But I think that, at least in my experience, like the smaller sort of startup, like make things fast and break stuff, it can be a little bit harder to get them bought into building, to like prioritizing accessibility, because they're like, we just want to make stuff and put it out there. And again, this goes back to like the larger conversation about ableism and like, if you're building something but you're excluding people, like, should you be building it in the first place? But yeah, larger companies, at least in my experience, like the larger company that I was working at before had, they had like a whole team of consultants that were the sort of accessibility experts that everybody, all the developers in the company could go to and be like, hey, we want to test this thing out. Can you help us? Because they were at risk of being sued. So I think that is something that does help make it more of a priority if they know like, oh, get a bunch of people complaining about this and like we're liable, we're like vulnerable for a lawsuit. They don't like spending money on that.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that as a developer, it's, if you know some of these like basic things, it's definitely the kind of thing that you can sort of have a grassroots level impact, where if you know to check for these things when you're reviewing PRs, that can be something that you point out. And that's sort of the level that I'm trying to work at now, is like when we're going to release a new feature, ideally before that, you want to do accessibility testing as early as possible. Because like anything, it's easier to fix earlier than later. So yeah, if you want to like test things for color contrast, or like if you're getting a design from a designer, that can be something that you look for. Or talking about like, you know, sometimes designs themselves will not be accessible. Like carousels are something that a lot of people reach for, but it's not a great user experience really for anybody. But that's a separate conversation. So yeah, there are like little ways that you can have an impact, and it's good to keep bringing it up too, so that there's sort of many voices advocating for it at all levels. Okay, great. Let's do a test. So I've got a couple of different things to look at. First, I figured we could test our site. So if I were going to start here, the first thing that I would do is like use my tab key. So right now, well here, let me refresh so that my focus is like in the right spot at the start. So I'm going to start hitting the tab key, and I would expect, yep, so see now there's a focus outline around, let me make this bigger. There's a focus outline around our button. And if I hit tab again, I would expect it to jump down here, which it does. And then it jumps over here, which is great. And then I would expect, so I'm holding shift and tab to like go backwards in the tab order. So if I hit enter, I would expect this to, yep, to like click the button for me. And then if I hit tab and enter in here, let's see. Oh, this is to filter. I don't have anything. So let me add an item, pickles. And then here, okay, so here, if I hit the enter, it tries to like submit the form. But if I click the space button, then that will, I'm hitting like the space button, and now I'm hitting the arrow keys to switch back and forth between the different inputs. So this is the kind of thing where like doing accessibility testing with actual disabled people is good, because they'll be more used to like what the sort of standard is for these kinds of controls. Whereas I'm just kind of guessing right now. Okay, and then I'll hit enter. Great, I'll hit enter again. Okay, cool. So that's sort of like how you would do accessibility or like keyboard testing. There's also like, let's see, let's look at color contrast. Won't be super interesting because it's all black and white. But if you, let's see if I can remember how to do this. There's like a way to look at the color.
I think it's in the accessibility tab. Or maybe.
Yeah, there's like a
Oh,
color picker thing that will show you, well here, it might be because we're just using the default colors. But like if I have something like this, then I can click on this little circle and see, okay, this tells me that this meets the AAA, what is it, contrast ratio requirements. But if I were to like drag this over here, you can see that this, whoops, you can see that it like live updates to show you like when you are, so this one is AA compliant, but not AAA compliant. And you can sort of like check things that way. So as we get into the next section of, or like our later issues of making this look like fun and pretty, that's something you can keep an eye on. Another thing that we can do is do the automated testing. So these Axe Dev Tools is an extension that you can add. And then if you open up your DevTools, you can click this button to scan your page. And then it'll show you all of the different issues that are on your site. Let me see if I can make this bigger. Nope. Well, that's funny that you can't actually change this. Well, maybe I can change it in the settings, but whatever. So here you can see there's different like severity levels for all of these issues. So here you can see we've got like 3 problems about color contrast, which makes sense because I made this not good. But if we wanted to look at that, you can click this highlight button here, and it will show you on the page like which elements are the problem. And then if I move the zoom window, if you click on these, you can see, you can like sort of scroll through all of the instances of that issue. And then let's see, what is our other one? All page content should be contained by landmarks. Okay, cool. So this is related to like the semantic HTML piece. So there are some like special HTML elements that are used for like indicating what part of your site does what. So there's like main, which is for like the main contents of your site, or there's header or footer, or like a side or section. There's a bunch of different ones. But the nice thing about this is that it will also link you to this like more info page, which takes you to DQ University. DQ is like the company that builds Axe. And this will tell you more about like what the problem is and how you can fix it, why it matters. So that's like how you use this Axe tool. And then the last thing.
Could I also share one thing on this?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think there's 2 things I want to share is for inputs, making sure each input has a label for it, which I think you have been doing pretty well. I can't remember if the checkboxes have a label like pickles, like if you right click that checkbox there. If that doesn't have a label, sometimes screen readers won't know what that input is for. Oh, look at that, you did that. Perfect.
Nice.
So then also when you search an item, when you're filtering an item, you'll see that the button that appears next to it just has an X in it. And that might not be very accessible for screen readers. They have no idea what that's for. So that's an example of where you would use an area label. You can use an area label to say this is to close or to reset the filter. If you just want to have like a button with an icon, you can use an area label for that.
Yeah, and actually the last little thing that I was going to do was to do some screen reader testing with VoiceOver, so we can look at how that works. Let me see. I don't know if you'll be able to hear this. So the way that I'm going to turn this on, there might be some extra setup that you have to do in system preferences, but once that's ready, I'm going to turn this on by hitting Command and then F5, and then. Oh, this box shows up over here. I'm going to move it. Can you see this box? There's like a gray box here. Okay, great. Yeah. So that is VoiceOver, and it's taking a little while to start up. Okay. Can you hear it? Or is that just me? No. Okay. I'm going to take my headphones off.
It could be a setting in the screen share. You might have to enable audio when you're screen sharing.
Yeah. See, so it reads everything. Can you still hear me? Okay, great. Yeah. So I'm going to, there are some like special controls that you use that are just like different keys on your keyboard that you can use to control VoiceOver. So right now I'm going to hold down Control and Option, and I'm going to use, let's see, Shift and then down to go like into our web page. So you can see the like black outline of what is currently highlighted. So if I go in here, now that I'm in the web page, I can use the left and right arrow keys while still holding down, you like hold down Control and Option the whole time. And then I can use the arrow keys to like go back and forth. So this tells you filter items is clickable, which is interesting. What if I click it? Okay, cool. So now that I'm in here, I can let go of Control and Option and just like type. Well, I guess I added that already. Okay, so now we should be able to see if I move my focus one more time to the button, So see how it just says X button? It like doesn't tell me what that button does. Ideally, this would be where we would use an ARIA label. I'm going to press Control to make it stop talking. And actually, I'm going to turn it off so that it's not chatting over me. So if I wanted to do that, I would go into this button here. And if you add like an ARIA label for clear search. Oh, did that do anything? There we go. I don't know why that didn't work. Okay, so now if I turn it back on, so Command F5, and then there we go. So I'm going to go back down into this and then keep hitting left until I get to that button. So now see it says clear search button instead. So then if I click Control Option Space, then it'll do the thing, it'll clear that. What's interesting is, okay, so I guess my focus still stays in that, in the input. And so this is like how you would do screen reader testing, is just sort of like going through your page to see, can you get to everything? There's also, okay, hush. There's also one other like feature, at least of VoiceOver, that people who use screen readers more regularly will use to sort of like hop around to sections of the page. So if you, I think it's Control Option U, it opens up this sort of like, I don't know what the official word for it is, but it opens up this extra menu, and then you can sort of like go back and forth to like, you can jump to a specific link on the page, or you can jump to a specific heading, or you could jump to a specific part of your form. One of these, well, normally there's one that shows up that's like landmarks, which actually here, let's go to like GitHub because that has one. So here, well, here, let me hit escape to close it and then reopen it. But if I go, so here you can see there's like, you can jump to a specific spot in a table, or you can jump to these landmarks, which are different parts of the site. So there's like the global navigation up here, or there's the main content of your site, or there's the repository, whoops, or there's the repository navigation. So these are like different ways that you can add markers to parts of your page that are like, okay, we know that people are going to want to jump to this feature a lot. And so we'll give them like a landmark to make it easier to get there. Let me turn this off again. Cool. So that was many, many things. But yeah, are there any questions on any of that stuff? That's like all that I was going to talk about.
I might post some questions in Slack
I can't
later.
hear you.
Oh,
Let me put my headphones back on.
can you hear me
Okay.
now?
Now it's like telling me. Okay, go now.
Okay, I was just gonna say I might add some questions in Slack later.
Yeah, sounds great.
About this.
I'll be around.
Cool.
Sweet. Go team.
Nice job.
Who's doing issues?
I'll do issues today.
Okay, awesome.
So if you ever come up with anything that you want to do for accessibility on the app, you can always add an issue in the future, and we can work that out. All right. So we have, let me just check the projects really quickly. Is correct? Oh, so we only have 2 more weeks of issues. Okay. So we have 2 issues this week. Oh, let me show you the groups of people, the teams. It's going to be Isa and Julia, and Sandy and Kelsey. So the first issue is as a user, I want to be able to delete items from my shopping list so that the list isn't cluttered with items I don't want to buy in the future. So it's just saying it. Sometimes people might add an item by mistake, so there should be a way to remove it. And we can do that by adding a button next to the item list and also prompting the user to confirm that they really want to delete the item to prevent accidental deletions. And deleting the item should cause the record in the database to be deleted as well. Usually I don't like to delete stuff. I'd rather add a field that says like deleted or something, but you can do either way. And then for issue number 12, as a user, I want to view a list of my shopping list items in order of how soon I'm likely to need to buy them again. So it's clear what I need to buy soon. So this one is going to be a issue for sorting the list based on how soon they need to buy them. So that the sooner ones you need to buy soonest will be at the top. The ones you need to buy later will be at the bottom. There'll also be like an inactive section, which is like items that there's only one item in the database or there's no actual calculation made yet on the purchase. So you don't actually know how soon you need to buy it again. So for this one, there's going to be, you can separate them out. So there can be like 4 different sections. So you'll have like a need to buy soon section with those items, kind of soon with those items and so forth. And as I mentioned, sorted by estimated number of days. And then if they have the same estimate, then it's sorted alphabetically. So does anyone have any questions on these?
For the second issue, those like need to buy soon, is it the frequency of those items?
It's what was calculated last week. It was the purchase, next purchase interval, I think it was.
Is it-
Yeah. Yes.
So we
Yeah.
will let inactive also. Inactive, yeah.
Yeah, so it'll be sorted by that number.
Mm.
Is
Don't have
this
any
where?
preference?
Oh, okay, I was wondering. I'm not gonna say. I think both of them could be cool. So
All right, how about Sandy picks one?
Right, I want Kelsey, like, do you have one in mind?
I'm really indifferent, so I'll go along with whatever you decide.
Since I worked a lot with calculator estimate last week, I probably want to do the delete one.
This one?
Totally
All right.
fair.
And then this one will be Isa and Huya. All right. Nice job, everyone, this week. This is the second to last set of issues, and next week will be the last issue, which is a group issue, and then I think that'll be like a 2-week issue. So that one will span 2 sort of sets of things. So this is like the last weekly issue set. So
Great
Cool.
job, everybody.
yeah.
Thanks.
all right, yeah, feel free to message us on Slack if you have any questions about accessibility or if you have questions about the issues. We will respond to them. So awesome job, everyone.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Talk to you later.
Bye.